Hello, my dear friends. I do hope you are well and getting into 2025. It's certainly been an interesting year already with all that seems to be happening in our world. But I do hope that you are well, and thank you for joining me in this reflection on John 2, 1 to 11, the wedding at Cana in Galilee. In the preface to the wedding service in the BCP, we read this: "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here together in the sight of God and in the face of this congregation to join together this man and this woman in the holy state of matrimony, which is an honourable estate instituted of God in the time of our innocence, signifying the mystical union betwixt Christ and his church, which holy estate Christ adorned and beatified with his presence and first miracle he wrought in Cana in Galilee." Now, it's a great preface. By the way, it's a great preface, isn't it? And I've read it so many times as I've officiated at so many weddings in my time. Now, most of the time, this is right. This preface is right. However, I'm not sure that Jesus went to Cana in Galilee to a wedding so that he might adorn it and beatify marriage. There is something else going on in the story. It's a great story that we can include in the preface of the marriage service, but it's a stretch to make it into what the BCP preface states, in that he adorned and beatified it. This week's gospel is, of course, another of my favourite passages, well, because it's from John, really, and it's the wedding of Cana at Cana in Galilee, and Jesus turning water into wine. Well, my Navy mates said that when I always asked me when I first got priesthood, does this mean, Keith, you're going to be able to turn water into wine? I said, yeah, no, not really, I don't think. They were quite disappointed in that, I reckon. But anyways, the passage in chapter 2 comes immediately after Jesus gathers up a few disciples, and there is this wonderful imagery of Jacob's ladder where the angels of God ascend and descend to earth on the Son of Man, that is, Jesus. The passage centres around a wedding in a place called Cana in Galilee. There are a couple of possible places that scholars think is this place. One's about 3 or 4 miles from Nazareth, and the other is about 9 miles. All are within walking distance for the day. I don't know if you had noticed, but there are a number of interesting points in the story. The first point of interest is that there is a reference to 3 days. Second, it's a wedding. Third, Jesus' mother is mentioned before Jesus is. Fourth, this is the first reference to the hour of Jesus. Fifth, there is a reference to wine. And sixth, the disciples believe in Jesus. Finally, the fourth evangelist records that this is the first of the signs that Jesus did. The reference to the third day is interesting. I think it's tied up with the fact that there is a wedding. However, it also stands alone. Remember, the fourth gospel is written probably 2 generations after Jesus' death and resurrection. The third day, I think, is a reference to Jesus being raised on the third day. I think this is about new life. It fits with the Old Testament texts indicating the beginning of a new life in places like Genesis chapter 42, verse 18, and God's healing and resurrection in Hosea chapter 6, verse 2. It could also be referencing God manifesting their glory on Mount Sinai in Exodus. The reality is that this third day is also linked with a wedding, and the reference to the hour of Jesus makes it all the more plausible that this is a story about what we would call the eschatological banquet that is going to take place after the general resurrection of the dead, when Jesus comes in glory, as we say in the Creed. And Jesus, of course, is the first fruits or the first promise of that reality, as St. Paul reminds us in 1 Corinthians 15, verses 20 to 23. The wedding is the next evocative image that we have from the text. It's from the image of the symbol of the covenant between God and the people of God. We are the bride, and God is the groom. We see this in Isaiah 54, verse 5, where we read, "For your Maker is your husband, the Lord of hosts is his name." Or in Hosea chapter 2, verse 18, and I will betroth you to me forever. This messianic banquet will see the glory of Jerusalem as a bride. We see in Isaiah 62, verses 2 to 5, for example. Thus, it will be a great time of a banquet. We see that in Isaiah 55, verses 1 to 5, with a great abundance of wine, as demonstrated in Amos chapter 9, verse 13 to 14. If all of this is true and being captured in this event in the life of Jesus, the fourth evangelist is claiming that the time is now approaching and is now when the messianic banquet will be realized, and all the nations who accept the Messiah, that is Jesus, will be included in the marriage feast of the Lamb of God, and it will be a great time of blessing and, of course, joy. Then we move on to the reference to the mother of Jesus. Now, Mary is mentioned before Jesus is mentioned, and I find that interesting. There seem to be two positions taken on Mary. The evangelical position, which for obvious reasons wants to distance itself from the Roman Catholic venerations of Mary, simply do not make much of the note about that she is mentioned before Jesus, except they really go into the dialogue with Jesus. The other tack is by those in the Roman Catholic tradition who overemphasize the role of Mary. This is exemplified by Mariologists such as A. Serra. I find it sad that Mary becomes such a flashpoint in such a manner, for after all, she is Jesus' mother and therefore undoubtedly much loved by Jesus. The fact that she is loved by Jesus so much is also interesting because there is a terse dialogue between Jesus and Mary. What's that all about? Well, what is clear from the text is there is a great opportunity for the narrative to develop as it does. If Mary had not been in the text, who would have gone to Jesus? The disciples? Yeah, I don't think so. The host? Highly unlikely. Thus, it appears that Mary needs to be there so that the first of the signs and the faith of the disciples in Jesus can take place might be cemented. The narrative is interesting. Mary comes to Jesus and tells him they have no wine. His response is quite startling. In the Greek, it's effectively, "What is that to you or to me, woman? My hour is not yet come." The Greek phrase, "What is that to you or to me?" is a common diplomatic phrase of the time, usually with negative connotations. However, as sometimes happens in the fourth gospel, when Jesus gives a negative response, he acts in a positive and usually compassionate manner. We can think of, in the fourth gospel at least, we can think of Jesus healing the official's son after berating the people and seeking about signs and wonders, or Jesus delaying his going to see Lazarus in chapter 11. Some commentators see this pattern of suggestion, negative answer, and then positive action as stressing Jesus' independence from our suggestions and a corresponding indirect invitation by him to us to absolute faith in him. We see this, don't we, in the Lazarus story, when Jesus invites Mary to have faith in him, despite her brother being in the grave 4 days. Your brother will rise. Well, yes, I know he'll rise. Well, has to have faith, Mary. Some commentators see this discussion between Jesus and Mary as a disassociation between him and her as part of his earthly life and the commencement of the proper messianic journey, if you like. In her excellent paper on this issue, Bernadette Jojko, I hope I pronounced that right, notes that even if it's not an offensive discourse, the fact that he refers to her as woman indicates a separation between them at a family level. His mission to all humanity is rooted in his deep relationship with his Father, as expressed in chapter 1:18 of the fourth gospel. We then move on to the reference to the hour. This is the first indication of this important theme in the fourth gospel. Between here and chapter 12, it is not the hour of Jesus, that is, the glorification of Jesus on the cross, It's only after the Greeks come seeking Jesus that Jesus shifts the moment to now is the hour. Chapters 2 to the middle of chapters 12 is really the book of signs, with Lazarus being the last of the signs. Then from the middle of chapter 12, when Jesus meets or has the encounter with the Greeks, is then the glorification of Jesus. Thus it seems that Jesus does not want people to get distracted from him doing miracles if they fail to see the importance of the cross and its central reality in bringing about salvation for all humanity through his glorification. The reference to wine is linked to the eschatological wedding feast. It's the best wine, and it's come late in the day, and it's overflowing in abundance. Jesus is obviously a great person to have at such a party. For the Jews, Jesus comes late in time as Messiah. But even though he comes late, he comes bringing the abundant love, mercy, and justice of God for all of humanity who will receive him as Messiah, the only begotten Son of God. Finally, somehow this miracle convinces the disciples about who Jesus is. It's improbable that they would believe on him simply by his turning water into wine as some sort of party trick. They must have been able to somehow put together the imagery of the eschatological wedding feast and connected it with Jesus as the true bridegroom, welcoming all into the marriage of the Lamb. So this story comes at the beginning of the fourth gospel. It's the fourth evangelist's way of introducing Jesus as Messiah, the true and only begotten Son of God. It was foreshadowed in the prologue of chapter 1, verses 1 to 18, and further hints were given to the readers and to us by the Baptist, declaring Jesus as the Lamb of God who takes away of the sin of the world in chapter 1, verse 35. And now Jesus declares his hand through this sign, a signpost that points us in the direction of understanding about who he is and why he matters, and why we need to place our faith and trust in him. He is the Messiah who brings reconciliation between us and God and invites us to be wedded to God through him, who is the true bridegroom, the one and only faithful one. The Lord be with you.